Namaskar, you're watching our special program, Democracies of the World, the program that brings you the latest news of events affecting the democracies across the globe. We'll also talk about the functioning and makeup of their democratic institutions. In today's edition, our top focus will be on the parliamentary elections in South Korea and the structure of its parliamentary system. Over the next half hour, we'll also talk about Hungary, the country which got its first ever women president. I'm your host, Bhawna Nayar. Let's start the program with a first report from South Korea. While the world's attention has been focused on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the instability in the wider region, South Korea, Asia's fourth largest economy, elected Yoon Suk-yeol, a conservative former prosecutor, as the country's new president after his liberal rival conceded defeat following a bitter battle in the politically divided nation. Yoon will take oath on May 10th. The election process comes at a time when the country is facing one of its worst waves of the coronavirus pandemic, pushed by the Omicron variant.
Yoon Suk-yeol, a conservative former top prosecutor, has been elected South Korea's new president, defeating his main liberal rival in one of the country's most closely fought presidential elections. Yoon, who has never held elected office, was declared winner after rival Lee Jae-myung from the incumbent Democratic Party conceded defeat. Official results showed 61-year-old Yoon edged out the ruling centre-left Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung to replace Moon, whose single 5-year term ends in May. Yoon garnered 48.56% of the votes, defeating his liberal rival Lee, who gained 47.83%. An estimated 77.1% people voted in the election on March 9th. The election was one of the closest in recent history and came after an unusually bitter campaign marred by scandals. Both candidates' disapproval ratings matched their popularity as scandals, mudslinging and gaps dominated what was dubbed the unlikable election. Calling the election result a victory of the great people, Yoon said that he would honor the constitution and work with opposition parties. During his election campaign, Yoon pledged to realize sustainable peace and safety on the peninsula through complete, verifiable denuclearization. He vowed to resume the stalled denuclearization talks in cooperation with the United States. Taking a hard line on national security, he promised to strengthen the comprehensive strategic alliance between Seoul and Washington and deploy additional units of the US THAAD anti-missile system in South Korea. On domestic issues, Yoon pledged support for small businesses and self-employed people and encouraged the private sector to create jobs and build millions of new homes. As an avowed anti-feminist, he has promised to abolish the Ministry for Gender Equality, claiming South Korean women do not suffer systematic discrimination despite voluminous evidences to the contrary. A newcomer to politics, Yoon will face an array of challenges when he replaces liberal incumbent President Moon Jae-in on May 10th. Threats from North Korea are high on the agenda, as well as rising tensions between South Korea's partners, the US and China. Yoon will have his hands full with domestic issues as well, with the growing gender war and surging COVID-19 cases. Yoon will take oath on May 10th and will serve a single 5-year term as leader of the world's 10th largest economy.
And now let's take a look at the functioning of the South Korean Parliament. The first National Assembly of South Korea was launched on May 31, 1948. Since then, the National Assembly, as a representative organ of the Korean people, has devoted itself to the development of parliamentary democracy. Let's take a look at this report.
The National Assembly of the Republic of Korea is a unicameral national legislature of South Korea. All the laws of the country are made by the National Assembly. At present, the members serve 4 years term. The National Assembly is composed of 253 members elected in local constituencies and 47 members elected through proportional representation. The executive power is vested in executive branch headed by the President. Under the Constitution, the President is elected by universal, equal, direct and secret ballot by the people. South Korea's President is constitutionally limited to a single 5-year term. The State Council deliberates on important policies that fall within the power of the executive. The President is the chairperson of the State Council and the Prime Minister is the vice chairperson. The judiciary of the government is composed of Supreme Court, appellate courts, district courts, family courts, administrative courts and the patent courts, among others. The Supreme Court Chief Justice is appointed by President with consent of the National Assembly. The term of Chief Justice and Justices is 6 years. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
And now from South Korea to Hungary, the Hungarian parliament has elected its first ever female president, Katalin Novak, on Thursday. Novak, who recently served as a minister for family policy, portrayed her election as a victory for women. She was elected to the mostly ceremonial role by 137 votes to 51 in the parliament. Novak has been the face of the government policies, including generous tax breaks and handouts designed to encourage young families to have more children. Thursday's vote comes weeks ahead of a crunch parliamentary election on April 3, where Prime Minister Viktor Orban faces stiff battle to win a 4th straight term in power since 2010. Novak will succeed János Áder, a co-founder of Orban governing Fidesz party, who has held the job since 2012. She will take office after Áder term expires on May 10th. And now moving on, by air, land and sea, Russia has launched a devastating attack on Ukraine, a European democracy of 44 million people. The situation inside Ukraine also seems unlikely to improve anytime soon, as diplomatic efforts have also failed to end chaos in the country. Among the top reasons for the ongoing war in Eastern Europe is the desire of Ukraine to become a part of NATO, a Western military alliance led by the United States. Russia has long resisted Ukraine's move towards European Union and West Defensive Military Alliance, NATO. However, in a media address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that he is no longer pressing for NATO membership. Well, this is a complex crisis and all the answers are hidden in the history. Take a look.
On 24th February 2022, Russia launched a military invasion of Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin called it a special military operation, but the scale of the attack shows this is a war. After weeks of fighting, it has already caused hundreds of civilian casualties and forced over 2 million Ukrainians to flee their homes. For months, Putin had denied he would invade his neighbor, but then he tore up a peace deal, sending forces into Ukraine's north, east and south. Foremost among the reasons for the ongoing war is Russia's disquiet about Ukraine's desire to become part of NATO alliance. Last year, Russia presented the United States with a list of demands, including that Ukraine should never join NATO. Putin also wants NATO to remove its forces and military infrastructure from member states that joined the alliance from 1997 and not to deploy strike weapons near Russia's borders. That means Central Europe, Eastern Europe and the Baltics. However, this is not the first time Russia has attacked Ukraine. In 2014, Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula, invaded eastern Ukraine and backed Russian separatists in the eastern Donbas region. That conflict has killed more than 14,000 people to date. Russia's assault grew out of mass protests in Ukraine that toppled the country's pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych, which began over his abandonment of a trade agreement with the European Union. US diplomats visited the demonstrations in symbolic gestures that further agitated Putin. But what does being a member of NATO mean? And why does Russia feel threatened by NATO? Being part of NATO means taking an active role in daily discussions on security and defense matters affecting the alliance. This could range from strategic measures to combat cyber warfare, to moving troops within NATO's borders to protect other members, as has happened during this crisis.
However, the roots of the current crisis grew from the breakup of the Soviet Union. Putin has long believed that Russia got a bad deal after the breakup of the Soviet Union, something he has called the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. At the time, Ukraine, a former Soviet republic, had the third largest atomic arsenal in the world. Western experts say that Putin is fixated on reclaiming some semblance of empire lost with the fall of the Soviet Union. Ukraine is central to this vision. Putin has complained that NATO has over time expanded its borders by admitting Eastern European countries that were once part of the Soviet Union, meaning Russia now shares a land border with the world's largest military alliance, thus reducing his geopolitical power in what was once Moscow's sphere of influence. As recently as February, Putin demanded that NATO scale back to the borders of 1997 before the Baltic nations of Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, the latter two of which border Russia, joined the alliance. NATO's defensive alliance has made clear there are no plans to send combat troops to Ukraine itself, but member countries have provided weapons and field hospitals, and the EU, for the first time in its history, is to buy and send arms and other equipment.
It's time for a short break now, but after the break, we'll talk about upcoming Colombia elections. All this after this short break. You stay tuned to Sansad TV. Welcome back after the break. You're watching our special program, Democracies of the World. Moving on, ahead of Colombia's legislative elections, candidates are stepping up their campaigns. Colombians will elect 108 senators, 188 representatives to the House of Representatives and the presidential candidates in May. Parties have endorsed many activists on the left of the political spectrum, hoping to lure young voters to the polls and win enough seats to change the balance of power in Congress. Colombia will also hold presidential elections at the end of the May. Currently, Colombia's Congress is dominated by 6 conservative parties that are aligned with the president. These parties hold 65% of seats in the Senate and a similar portion in the House of Representatives. And from Colombia to United States of America, calling it a momentous day for justice and fairness in the workplace, US President Joe Biden last week signed into a law a bill that ends forced arbitration for workers who are victims of sexual assault and harassment. The measure prohibits employers from forcing workers to settle sexual misconduct claims in closed-door arbitration venues that often favor alleged perpetrators. Employees instead can sue in court with their own legal representation, but they still have the arbitration option.
Between half and 3/4 of all women report that they have faced some form of sexual harassment in the workplace. And too often they're denied a voice and a fair chance to do anything about it. Today, we send a clear and strong message that we stand with you for safety, dignity, and for justice. Forced arbitration isn't court. In fact, forced arbitration prevents survivors from going to court. And under forced arbitration proceedings are conducted in secret, often by arbitrators selected and paid for by the employer. And the outcomes of the arbitration are usually hidden from the public and the employees and co-workers, and they usually can't be appealed or can't be overturned.
And now a story coming in from Britain. Britain's Queen Elizabeth II is unlikely to live at Buckingham Palace in London again, choosing their Windsor Castle residence in Berkshire as her base. The 95-year-old monarch has been based at the castle, traditionally only a weekend retreat, since she moved there for isolation during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Buckingham Palace, which has been the official London residence of British monarchs since 1837. Windsor Castle was previously only the Queen's getaway home and her residence for Easter and royal escort races in June. The global proportion of women parliamentarians has increased by 0.6 percentage points, according to the IPU's latest Women in Parliament in 2021 report. This is in line with the progress seen in the past 2 years. 5 countries, including Rwanda and the United Arab Emirates, now have gender parity or a greater share of women in parliament, up from 3 in 2020. Take a look at this report.
In its annual report on women in parliament, Inter-Parliamentary Union said the global average of female parliamentarians inched forward by 0.6 percentage points to reach 26.1% by the end of 2021. This was the same pace of progress as in 2020 and 2019. The report maintained that the increase can be largely attributed to the critical role played by quotas for women. The report maintained in the 48 countries that had parliamentary elections in 2021, women candidates won 28.6% of the new seats, a cumulative improvement of 2.1 percentage points compared to previous elections. However, only 18 women were made speakers, the top parliamentary position, out of the 73 elected across chambers around the world. Overall, on 1st January 2022, women accounted for 22% of speakers of parliament, up from 20.9% a year ago. Again, the Americas region saw the highest share of female representation, with 39.1% of MPs elected or nominated in 2021 being women. At 30.4%, the European region had the second highest share of women elected in 2021. In Asia, the share of women nudged up by 0.8 percentage points. Overall, 21.1% of MPs elected or nominated in 2021 were women.
That's all we have in this edition of our program on Democracies of the World. Please connect with us on various social media platforms. You can send in your feedback at Sansad TV at sansad.nic.in. You can also download our mobile app Sansad TV. We'll bring you more stories of different democracies in our next edition. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more informative programs on Sansad TV. Till then, goodbye, namaskar.